So that is work in progress, but it's not perfect. If you feel it, it's got some flatter areas on it. The wood's quite tricky to work with, black walnut. I'm possibly going to do what I did on this one here. This is, again, was one of my favorites. This I actually turned using a sphere jig. So with my lathe at home, it's got a swiveling head, and I was able to turn the head so that the disc of wood was about here. I then had the sphere jig in here, and I was able to turn either side of it until I ended up with that. And it's absolutely perfectly circular in profile, whereas that, if you cut that in half, it wouldn't be. But that's done by hand. So that's that one. This one is one that didn't go well. Started out life as a piece of cherry, it fought me all the way. It was just breaking up, splitting. So I cut the bloody thing in half, textured it all to hide all the crap. And then I used a metal reactive paint on it just to do that. And a bit of an unusual one. The lamp that you see on the far right-hand side, the ash lamp, started out life as this huge, great chunk of base of an ash tree that had split and fused into 3 trunks. And you can just make out where the splits are. The dark lines are where it's fused together. So I cut the bottom off it, got it on the lathe, and turned it again. Quite an interesting project to turn. Then the other one that's there, again, quite a nice torus form. It's quite accurate. The wood itself was really boring. Apart from the little inclusion at the top, it was just plain white wood, barely any grain feature in it at all. So just as an experiment, I painted it with a rattle can of stone effect paint. Hence that. Anyway, so may I pass that to you, and then you can go around those sort of work in progresses. So how do we start? Wood selection. Anything, as long as it's quite big. So this was a huge, great chunk of oak that I had in the shed this morning. So I cut it down on the bandsaw, mounted it on the lathe, and I've turned it to this stage so far. So the important thing is to ensure your safety. So always make sure that it is nice and firm. Now this is held in with an Axminster screw chuck, and it does the job very well. On some woods, it's a bit punky, and I wouldn't necessarily trust the screw chuck. So for instance, the large ash one on the right-hand side, I used the ring that goes with the Axminster chuck, screwed that on, and it proved to be quite successful. Didn't have any problems. But, you know, particularly with the unusual shaped pieces of wood, you do need to make sure that they are well and truly held, because they have a tendency to want to wobble. You're all right. Yes.
These are all feature big pieces, aren't they? Really nice show. If you just start it, why don't you just use a bold?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. The only thing with that is that you need to be able to hold a bulb in there. I'll cover that now. What I use are these Edison style bulb holders, and these have got parallel sides. A lot of bulb holders that you buy have got tapered sides, and they're a pain in the bum. So I use these. So the wood needs to be big enough, thick enough, to be able to drill a hole that size in it, and to be able to get a little grub screw. I'll come to that in a bit. But that kind of reminds me that when you are choosing a piece of wood and choosing what size bulb you want to use, you basically screw your bulb into the bulb holder, you hold the bulb in the middle, and you go, yeah, that's about right. And you mark roughly, that's where it's going to be.
I'm guessing you don't get smaller bulb holders than that, though.
That's the standard bulb holder that I've used every time.
Yeah.
There are smaller threads for this is an E27,
Yeah.
and you can get a smaller one. Never investigated them. I never found any bulbs with that size. But obviously for a bulb of that size, you need a substantially bigger piece of wood. This piece here is quite a small piece of wood. So I've designed it set it up so that it's there. And the majority of the bulb holder is hidden. Sorry. So the majority of the bulb holder is actually hidden within the Torus form itself. Okay? So basically, it's just a case of marking it out. And it doesn't have to be perfectly round. You could make it more oblong shaped, like this piece is going to be, because it is proving to be an absolute pig to work on. So as you can see, it's not perfectly round. I'm just radiusing the corners off and making rounds here. Lump of wood that I put in a mold, poured in the resin, and it's giving me all sorts of nightmares because the wood is splitting. I've got big splits here. And the other issue with this is so unbalanced. It's proving a real pig to turn. So this project started February, March. I took it out of the mold in May, and I've spent a few hours on the lathe with it, but I keep putting it to one side because it's doing my head in. So yeah, how do we get going then? So whatever tools you've got, whatever your preferred method of turning, just go with it. So in terms of, you just make it as clean and as round as you possibly can. And if you can, bring up some tailstock support. And a bit of protection. And you choose your favorite gouge. Yep. So obviously get it running as fast as you dare. Running quite nicely, fortunately. And then don't copy my techniques.
But they will.
Entirely up to you how you The turn. I'm not going to go too mad because you'll get bored. But basically use whatever tools you have at your disposal to make it as round as possible. And then once you've got it as round as possible, you kind of have to move this away. Okay, and you can kind of check. So this is 80 mil diameter, and you want it to be about the same. So probably about there, to be honest. Now, what I've done on this piece is I've actually drilled both sides. I'm using the same screw chuck hole on both sides. So if I've got a spare screw chuck, I'll put one in either side. So I can just flip it over, but they're a bit tied up at the moment. So I'm just kind of swapping them around. So it doesn't matter, but as long as you've got a nice flat area here, you can kind of do what you like in here. So what I then use is just a little one of Gary Rance's little round skews that he's got, and it's very useful for basically just going in. Go back to a gouge. Always stop the lathe. What are you saying there?
Yeah.
And then you can start the rounding process again. Now this is a piece of very open grain oak. It's not particularly nice to turn. And it's got splits in it and all sorts. Okay. God, I hate this thing. So basically that's what you do. And when you get to, you don't want to go obviously too far through, you just want to get it nice and round. And what I developed, what I made at work, because I have a nice laser engraver and cutter, is I made myself some little Perspex templates. So that's 80 mil diameter. So basically, I can turn that away until that matches that, and I've got them every 5 mil. And you basically just get it as best you can. flip it over, do exactly the same on the other side. You are then at
Will two screw chucks ever meet in the middle?
haven't had it happen so far because they're only about that long, aren't they? But one important thing is that when you do start flipping it over, particularly when you go on to the like cold jaws, this piece here, the hub, must be recessed. It mustn't be proud of what you've turned, because otherwise it will wobble on the backing plate. So when I do them, I just take a few millimeters off and I just check that it's still rebaited away slightly, okay? So that's that. Oh yeah. Now then. So this is one that I've done quite a bit of work on. So I was rushing it a little bit. So the actual circular profile is not brilliant. And I'll hold my hands out to that. So it's not great. But so at this stage, you check. If you can see, the hub is slightly lower than the face of the bit of wood. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is actually take this off the screw chuck now. And that, the hub, is lower than the actual outside. Okay, so that's that. The cold jaws, button jaws, whatever you want to call them, are quite critical to the process. Gosh, you need to be able to hold the work. I'll take the chuck off. That will help, won't it? Where we find the cold jaws. Oh yes, just. Yeah. And tighten these because there's such a lot of inertia that if you turn the lathe off sometimes, they tend to unscrew themselves. This is where it could all go very horribly wrong.
So you've done a lot of modified for those cold jaws?
Ah, yes. So, thanks, Trevor. Standard button jaws. Try not to drop anything here because I'll never find it. That's your standard button jaw button. Okay, which is great for. What's that thing behind it? Is that a bolt with a bit of hose pipe? Yeah, basically. I've just got some aluminium tube, and then I put some fairy washing up liquid around it, and I slid some hose pipe onto it, just to protect the work that you're working on. So on this particular size, I use a long one and a slightly shorter one. I have longer bolts and further spacers. So I can make it quite a lot wider. You just want to make sure that as much of the apex of the curve is, if that makes sense, is supported, and it won't come past the buttons. Okay, did that make sense? So I've also, for some of the bigger projects, made some extensions. So they screw onto there and you can move them all the way out. So your button's there, so you can make up a really wide platter or bowl. Obviously it has to be off the end of the lathe to be able to do that. So that's just something else that I've do to make life allow me to do bigger things.
And they're just aluminium plates.
Just aluminium plates. Again, just something I had, fortunately, hanging around in the workshop. And you need a big lathe. So the lathe I've got at home is similar size to this. It's the Axminster 1628. 406, correct. And that allows you to slide the head all the way off to the end. It's got a bed extension, which then drops further down here on the legs. So you can do massive stuff on it. But the bigger the stuff, the more unusual the shape, like that, it gets interesting. Anyway, so where were we? So, like I say, could get interesting. Try not to over tighten these. It's not going anywhere. I'm giving that a good old tug. It's not going anywhere, but if you over tighten it, you're going to bend these and damage the threads in there. Also, you want to make sure that you have got a decent amount of thread going into the cold jaws, not just half of it, otherwise that will really make a mess of your threads. So, I'm getting way too hot under that visor. So I'm going to try this. And everybody's got to be responsible for their own safety. So please bear that in mind. I've had a few nasty nips and cuts from doing these larger bits. Right, turn it down.
Cool, that's the fan.
Well, yeah, and nice whip if you're so inclined. So, the hope here, damn it, I meant to show a little, these are handy. Can't do it now because I've taken it off. I've put it on, should I say. But if you get that in there when it's off the lathe, so when I did that this morning, it's got about that much of meat still left on the hub, okay? So I do need to be a bit careful. Can't go too mad. The first one that I ever turned, I got carried away and it was spinning away on the hub, didn't have any support around the outside. I'm turning it, I'm turning it, I'm turning it. I'm going, yeah, any moment now, I'm going to come through. And it did. It went through the hub and a piece of wood came off flying. It got caught on this. And if you look at the photographs, I've actually photographed where there's these big scores around the outside. So I then had to remount it, turn it a bit more and sand it. Okay, right. So, wish me luck. Ooh, sounding interesting. There we go. It's a bit of a mess. There we go. Use that for something else. There we go. Right. So, with that in that position, we can now get in there. Still running nicely. One thing you have to accept is that they're not perfect. Because I haven't used the sphere jig, had I used the sphere jig, it would have been a lot more accurate. But I'm quite pleased with the way the ones turned out. And you literally will now just go in there with the jig and carry on turning it until you've got it to the exact shape that you want it and you're satisfied. Tons of sanding. Then you flip it around and do the other side as well. Yeah. So that is the process that I use for turning a Torus with the equipment that I've got. There's other people have done, I've seen a couple of videos where people have got cones which they'll clamp together and hold the Torus in the middle. But with the equipment that I'm fortunate enough to have, that's what I've found to be the most successful. Trevor, do you want to? As I say, still needs a lot of work. But if you feel round it, it's not perfectly round. But for the purposes, absolutely. Yeah. How do I? So while it's still on the hub, and before I've put it onto this, I will have put a finish on it. You can still get a finish on that by moving all of these to the inside and moving the jaws out to clamp it from the inside. Then you just got to treat like 4/4 of the project. Yeah? Now, I'm not going to really cover finish, other than to say use whatever your preferred finish is. And that one was just an experiment, as I say, just a stone effect paint. I was quite pleased with it. So the bulb holder. roughly there. Always try and protect the piece you're working on. Forcing a bit. 38mm, same size as the bulb holder. If you manage to find some different sizes, different size, forcing a bit. This is the way I do it. So once you're happy and the Torus is all finished, you kind of mark it up. You mark some centers on it. It's not coming out. So a knockout bar. So all I will do, once it's marked up, and I'm satisfied, put a bit of protective packing in there. Bring that forward. And with the drill on a nice slow speed. Okay. And you're just checking that everything's in line. Hold it down. I'm not going to go all the way because you basically go all the way through until it comes out through the inside section of the Torus. Then the bulb holder slips in there, all the way in. The strong part of the fitting is about here, okay, where the join is. If you go anywhere else, you can crack the fitting quite easily. So just go on there, and what I use is I just put it in there, decide where the bulb needs to be, and I mark, and I drill a small hole, and I've got some little grub screws, Allen key headed grub screws. And if you look at the back of my lamps, that there is the hole for the grub screw. And you just, a little bit of wax on it to help it go into the hole. And then as soon as it starts to nip up on the bulb holder, you're done. But in terms of feet, legs, whatever, I quite like these now. They're much simpler than trying to turn 4 balls and trying to get 3 or 4 fixings and legs in exactly the right place to make it upright and stable is very difficult indeed. So again, same aluminium tube that I've used for my extension bits there is what I use on there. And then just bolt or screw up with some big screws up underneath. So that's the basic sort of Torus forms talked about.
Yours is bigger than mine.
So with the more unusual ones, the big cherry one that I did, this piece of ash, the initial part is quite straightforward. You hold it on there in a chuck, you turn the sides. That one I've done a nice taper so that it's narrower on the edges than it is in the middle. The cherry one was done similarly. The problem comes when you want to turn away the inside because it's very difficult to hold it. So what I did was I made myself up this plate, which is just a couple of big chunks of MDF, bit of oak, and I've got the Axminster Colossus jaws. So that hangs off the end of my lathe, like so. And I have turned this piece of ply in here, and I'll try and make that the same size as the aperture, roughly, so that when the lamp, or when the torus form sits on there, it self-centers. And then I come along with any kind of bracket, fixture, whatever, just to try and make it as secure as possible. And in one of those pictures over there, I've got all these plates coming on, supporting the piece of work so that it doesn't.
You just screw them in wherever they are.
Screw them in, yeah. And occasionally, you may end up having to put a screw into the work, which is not ideal, but it won't fly off, and you can fill it. And
I take it your lathe is securely fastened to the floor.
no, it likes to go for a walk from time to time. The cherry was the cherry one was particularly interesting. It was yeah, life-threatening, and that wasn't a lot better. But you know, types of wood, it needs to be probably minimum of about 3 inches thick to start with. From what you were saying, you know, if you want to do a smaller one, yeah, you can, whatever you like. And if you want to, you could probably turn a Torus, maybe even put a little mirror in the back of it. You know, if you put a little flange in the back, you know, all kinds of things, put photographs in them or whatever. Just, yeah, but that's my technique. Types of wood. Oh, God. I have no idea where this came from. I see that potentially as a lamp. I'm going to get it on the lathe. I'll use the ring on this side because it's much flatter. That will go on there. That will be bolted on. I'm going to ignore the big gaping void for the time being and see what happens when I start to turn it. I don't think it's going to fall apart, but I won't be standing in front of it when I'm turning it. I'll be standing to one side. So
a nice big hole in the middle of the Torus, you might find the outside meets the inside.
That's what I'm hoping. And I'm just hoping it will stay together. If I'm concerned at any point, I'll fill it with resin. I'll fill that with resin. But yeah.
I've actually put little wooden straps across and screwed them in.
Yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, or could use butterflies, you know, the butterfly type fixings. Use all types of things. But yeah, I look at that piece and I think, that could be interesting. I'll probably leave the outside pretty much like it is. Maybe sand off some of the looser pieces. But yeah, keep an eye out for it because that could be a lamp one day. I don't know that there's much more that I can tell you about how I go about doing them. Any more questions?
Where's the name Torus coming from?
I don't know, Harvey. It's the Greek. I think it is known as a torus form. I'll investigate for next meeting, shall I? A what, Chuck? This? This one. So this is the Axminster SK 114. And the large coal jaws, yeah. They're called coal jaws. Coal. Mr. Coal, I think. Yeah, or other people call them button jaws. Yeah, or you can make your own out of quarters of plywood. Do whatever you like. But yes, thank you. Say again.
Swilling, bolster, round moulding.
Okay.
What's a jam donut?
So I'll probably whiz through that a little bit too quick, but if there are any other questions, I could put this other one back in and do a bit more turning. Yes. Yeah. It's very dry now. My wife doesn't do any gardening. You haven't met my wife? Yes, you have, actually. It's just some stuff that we had in stock from where we needed to make up some spaces for a job, a sign, and we needed to project it off the wall. And like you could only buy a 2.5 meter length. And yeah, well, that's quite thick. If you look at it, it needs to be substantial.
That's quite a thick wall.
Yeah, it is a very thick wall. Because I'm a bit of a hoarder and I don't throw anything away because all these bits come in useful at some point, don't they?
When I made stuff, I couldn't get the aluminium tubes, so I just used some hardwood.
Yeah.
It's a bit difficult to make sure it's split.
You can. It's very easily available. You could probably get it off Amazon. You can get it on the internet. You just find the thing. You probably pay more in delivery and carriage than you will for the actual product.
Not with Amazon Prime.
But then they make it very expensive when you only want to buy one bit. Yeah, but these were just some 6 mil thick aluminium flat bar that I had.
Yeah.
So I just chopped them up, very carefully drilled them, very accurately drilled them, and that's the result. So I can now extend my coal jaws even further. But they are quite dangerous when they're flying around at speed. So you do need to keep your fingers out of the way, don't you, Malcolm?
Where did you get the lumber bolts from? Do they stand?
Just any nut and bolt shop. We used. Well, you can get them from Screwfix actually. If I don't have it, work buys it. So those ones, they came from Screwfix. Some of the ones I've got, these happen to have the same aluminium key head as, Allen key head as the ones that are on the jaws, wherever they're gone. But others have just got.
Do you know what? You obviously know what the thread is on.
Yeah, it's like these are M6.